Hello, welcome to Flourish by the Fort. My name is Layla and it has been a really long time since I've done a video. Where have we been for the last 5 months? Well, in March, just after our last video, we all got COVID. Not the first family to get it, won't be the last family to get it. We weren't terribly sick with it at the time, however I had some complications afterwards. For approximately a week I could not walk unaided. I had inflammation in my back due to the variant that we had and an immune issue I have. Then I had approximately a week or so of restricted movement. I couldn't do the heavy work that was required in the garden. At that time was when we first started to get warm weather, and it went from being really well looked after to extremely weedy at the plot, and it felt very large task very quickly when I was recovering. Unfortunately, I had further complications in that I got tired very easily. I struggled to do things for longer than a few hours, whereas before I could garden for the entire day and just stop when I had to. Everything seemed to get out of hand very quickly. Come May is the biggest time of year when you're usually putting everything in the ground and potting up and so on, and everything just seemed to get behind very quickly. We did progress with the plot further, however. The first thing that we did after our last video was we managed to finally put up our shed, which was lovely. We have some footage of that just now and we can show you that being put up. Our shed has been a great addition to the plot. We knew it would be. It gives us shelter from the rain and the sun, holds all the tools, holds fun things for little people, and it's just a nice place. We haven't got the inside how we would like it yet. That will come on days when we're not gardening outside. We thankfully had the help of my father-in-law to put that up, and it survived a very big storm very soon after it was put up, and we were very relieved that it survived. I had some further problems with the plants that I was growing. A lot of germination was fine, plants started growing okay. When I potted plants up, which you saw in the last video, I did mention at one point that the compost felt a bit odd and I was putting a lot of perlite through it to try and make it more airy. It felt a bit claggy to touch, which was strange, and I think it had herbicides in it, unfortunately. A lot of my plants became stunted, they became yellow, very typical of herbicide-laden compost. Unfortunately, it's really common, especially since gardening has become so popular over the last couple of years. There seems to be quite a large supply and demand issue. I know I'm not the only person affected by it. I initially thought I was doing something wrong because I wasn't being as caring as I had been because I was exhausted, but it turned out that it when I repotted them into a different compost, things went better. So I do believe it was a compost issue. That put us behind on a lot of things that we were growing. Shortly after the shed, we got the paths and some beds put in. We received 3 cubic metres of wood chips from a man who had a vehicle that was from the 1950s, a German army vehicle. It's really interesting. So he delivered that. We were able to put kind of no-dig paths type thing in, so it was a layer of cardboard overlapping in most places, and then a really thick layer of wood chips over the top of it. That was really, that looked really nice really quickly, and it gave a lot of shape and structure to the plot instantly. We laid out the beds to the left-hand side of the plot, where the soil seems a lot freer and easier to work. I think there's been a lot of lava grit put in there. And we planted up things like the onion seedlings that you saw me sowing in the last video, and I direct sowed things like beetroot and carrots for clay. I did some nasturtiums at the end to try and bring the pollinators into the rows. I put some bush beans in, things like that. The next thing we did was we put fences in. We had planned from the very beginning to put fences in. A lot of people in that part of the allotment don't have fences, but in the other areas of the allotment they do, to separate their boundaries, create a barrier for public and other gardeners, so they know where their boundaries are. A lot of people use them for growing up, for vertical growing, and some of them are just, I think, for aesthetic reasons. I did mine for various reasons, to create a boundary, to stop my dog going onto other people's gardens if we take her up there, and also for vertical growing. The plan from the very beginning was to put the fence in. We researched which fence we were going to use. We researched from the association rules which height we were allowed, which type of fencing we're allowed, so you have to be able to see air through it. It's not allowed to be a solid fence, so it shouldn't create shade onto other people's plots. We put the fencing up, and as we were putting it up, my neighbour to the right at the top of the allotment approached me and asked if we would not put a fence at the back of the allotment, which would nullify the whole point of putting a fence around the whole thing, because it's to keep the dog in and to keep people out. She had sought permission from the neighbour next to us to cross his land to get water access, so we get all our water from a ditch. She didn't want to walk 50, 60 metres, which was always the way that she was going to have to walk to get water, but she no longer wanted to do that. So she asked if we would not fence the back of our plot in. I said that wasn't going to be possible. Otherwise, we would also have to buy more fencing, more posts, and lose 6 square metres of our garden at the back. Nothing else was said between us about it. When we put the fence up, she would arrive at the plot and she would walk away again. She would stand and stare at our fence when she thought we weren't looking like she was going to climb over it. We realised that people had been going over the back of our garden because the ground that had been ploughed was completely solid there, and we didn't understand why, and that is why. She was very unhappy with us and proceeded to tell all the neighbouring plot holders that she was unhappy with us. I felt like I was back at school again, except I really had that problem at school, so it was unexpected. We did everything by the rules. She complained to the association about it. I had already been in contact with them about it, not an official basis, but just look, this has been going on, just to make you aware kind of thing. They had already seen my fence, there was nothing wrong with it. The association contacted me and asked if we would be willing to work with them to try and come to a solution. There was 2 trains of thought within the association. One person thought that we shouldn't give any of the allotment because the saying of you give an inch and you take a mile. Give an inch, take a mile. Is that the saying? they were concerned that should we do this for this neighbour, that other people would want that and it would cause more disputes, which is totally understandable. I was coming from a perspective that I was new there, young, female, a large plot, nobody thinks that I can do it. I'm also a foreigner here, so that does matter to some people. And as a result, I decided to work with the association, who asked if I would be willing to give a path at the back of the garden. I said that we would, even though I didn't really want to. We had spent weeks clearing that. You've seen on our previous video, on our very first video, which is linked down below, that our first month we spent clearing that back area. It had yucca roots, it had brambles, it had rhubarb, it had trees, just weeds and everything. It was several loads to the recycling centre. It was a lot of work to clear that area. They asked if we would give 30 to 60 centimetres, and I just said we would do a metre so that it would clear it up easily for numbers for the plot. We did have 335 square metres before that, and it would just be easier if we just shaved off what it was. I thought it was 5 square metres, but it ended up being 6 square metres at the back. However, I said that I would have no place in maintaining it or looking after it. So we did that. We fenced it in. We actually paid for it. We did get asked what the cost was. We had some fencing left over from our fence, just to save trouble and, you know, having to collect money or whatever. We just absorbed the cost of it. Neighbour never thanked me and has never thanked me to this day for creating that path, for giving up 6 square metres, and I am annoyed. I was brought up to say thank you when people give you things, and I gave them a part of my garden. They think because I have a large garden that is there for taking. It's not. A bit further along you'll learn more why I'm saying that. The very day that we finished the fence, the neighbour on the same side as this person who had issue with the path at the back spoke to us, or spoke to my husband, actually, it's my plot, but spoke to my husband and said that he was unhappy with the placement of the fence because it was too close to the path. After having dealt with the other neighbour for several weeks and all the drama surrounding that, I was a bit done, as you can probably understand. Having followed the rules and the height and the type of fencing, having spent a lot of money on it, having spent a lot of time putting it up, my husband did, still recovering from illness, I was pretty unhappy at that point. Felt like that I couldn't do anything right despite doing everything right. First of all, the neighbour came across as relatively friendly. He had previously commented on where my compost heap was, which is about 30 centimetres away from the path in towards my garden. And I said to him, you know, you can get past with a wheelbarrow, it's not a problem. His issue was that he couldn't stand on the path and maintain his garden without bumping into my fence. So I had suggested that he create a wider path on his side so that he could stand and rake it or whatever he wanted to do with it. He disagreed strongly. The next time we came along, we noticed that the fence, instead of being really straight, was actually leaning this way. And he had then spoke to my husband again and said that he had bent the fence towards our garden to create more space. We asked him not to do that. The committee asked him not to do that. He was not very nice with them when they approached him about that. And it all kind of blew up. I mean, this is a fence and a garden. This is what it's all over. It sounds ridiculous when you talk about it, but it seems like a very big thing at the time. It got to the point where I no longer wanted to go to the garden, and in all honesty, had I not had the shed there, I probably would have given it up, because one of the many reasons that I wanted a garden there was to get away from neighbourly disputes, not disputes, neighbours, inconsiderate neighbours here at our home. We're surrounded by them. So we really wanted to find a place where we could escape to and enjoy nature and enjoy growing and have some peace. And that suddenly wasn't going to be possible. We proceeded to continue with small jobs. We made insect hotels. We painted a bench rainbow colours for a small person in our life. We built a rose arch. We made the compost heap, which I've already mentioned, and a sweet pea teepee, and just small kind of things whilst maintaining the garden in small stages so that I could manage my tiredness. And then we decided to finish the fencing. So the plan all along was that we would have wire fencing around the side of the plot, around the back of the plot, and around the other side of the plot. But at the front we wanted something a bit more aesthetically pleasing, and we wanted to use wood. My father-in-law had some reclaimed wood that we could use. We just had to buy the posts and things like that. I say just, with wood prices now, it was not a small feat. They spent a day building the front fence, and it looked really good. And actually, in the more simple form of the design, we decided to stop. We didn't add the picket fencing because it looked really nice and quite like a ranch, I guess, at the front. So we kept it like that. The next time I saw my neighbour, he tried to have an argument with me. Well, he argued. I didn't respond very much. He didn't like that the wooden part of the fence, and we'll probably insert a photo, came in next to the path. Now, one thing that the committee had already told him was that the path actually belonged to my garden. So in the fact that I had put the fence in at my side of the path and allowed them still to use the path, I was being generous. I could have put my fence at that side of the path. I lose quite a lot of land with that path all the way up, but I didn't know that it was mine at the time. I suspected that it was, but I've created paths within the garden, so it wasn't really an issue for me to put the fence where we put it. He disagreed with that. He disagreed with the committee on the placement of where the garden should start and finish, because he knew people that had been there for a long time, even though they'd had nothing to do with mapping out the gardens. He basically had issue and said that he couldn't pass through. Now, he could pass through. He also has fencing at the front of his garden, which is very dilapidated and old, and he could have moved that to the side so that he could have created a bigger path. He also had access at the other side of the garden, and that's actually the way that he accesses his garden, from the other side, not from the path that he was disputing about. He got very angry with me, and I wouldn't engage with him. I just said, not today, and walked away from him. And after that, I didn't really want to go there. He contacted the committee quite enthusiastically several times, threatened to leave, blah blah blah. It's left a really bad taste. I go up there and I don't want to see my neighbours. I semi-sorted things out with the original neighbour that had the complaint about the back path. I kind of laid down a boundary in that I wished her to stop speaking about me to other people and trying to cause trouble, and that we would be civil to each other, and that be that, and there'll be no more complaints about my garden. She agreed, and we say hello to each other and bye-bye, and that's it. That's all that's needed. I just go up there. I don't go up there for deep conversations with people. If I have one with a like-minded person, then great, but it's not my reason for going up. The committee spoke to the second complaining neighbour, and basically stated that he was too emotional to be able to approach me and speak civilly, so if he had any issue, they had to go to him direct. That should he touch our property again, so the likes of our fencing, that he would be removed from the garden with immediate effect. He continued to be unhappy, but eventually, apparently at this point now, he wants everyone to be able to continue gardening. It's really messed up how extreme he reacted about it. I have not restricted any path access to either sides of his garden. if he wanted to be able to get a wheelbarrow, which I've never seen him use, I don't know if he even has one, he could use the other path. Or, as it was suggested to him, create a path on his own land like I have. So I have one going up the middle of the path, middle of the garden. He didn't see it like that, and I'm not sure that he will. At this point, I'm at the stage of ignoring him. I saw him once, and he looked at me in a way that no one has ever looked at me before. He looked at me like I just kicked a puppy or a small child in front of him. Stared at me with this most horrifically sad face, and I have done nothing wrong, so I'm not going to apologise for anything. If he wants to say hello and goodbye, you know, I will not ignore him, but we're not going to be buddies. We have bought a strimmer, battery operated one, so that we can use it at the garden. That is helping a lot. We are trying to just clear weeds around plants that are growing to give them a chance, basically. I feel like this season is a failure, and I write it off because I didn't achieve all the things that I wanted to achieve, and I nearly gave up on my dream because of people being unkind, and a disease that I tried to avoid for 2 years. So, but we carried on. I carried on. I had a lot of support from my husband and my in-laws, and I'm very grateful for that, but it still feels like a lot. A friend reminded me that where we start next year will be far ahead of where we started this year. So we won't have to put in the fence, we won't have to put up the shed or the paths. Maybe they might be overgrown by weeds by then, but you know, the structure is there. We just have to start with the planting and the weed, and now we know what we're up against there. I have never known so many hardcore invasive weeds in one spot. We have mare's tail, we have 2 types of bindweed, we have thistles, we have small hogweed, we have couch grass, we have a huge amount of invasive type grasses, including Japanese millet. We're actually going to grow some millets there, but we haven't had to for our birds. That's not native here, so I'm not sure where that came from. A lot of these weeds cannot be simply plucked out. A lot of them are just a case of keep cutting them at the top until they lose power, basically. We also have some reeds that come in from the ditch, brambles. It's never ending. Had I known the weed pressure on that plot, I would have never taken it on. I would have never ploughed it. I haven't also been able to do as much no dig as I'd hoped because I didn't get organised to get a load of compost there, so I was taking up bags. It's very expensive to do it that way. Next year I hope to add more soil and create a better soil structure, and I should have less issues with things like thistles and hopefully mare's tail, because mare's tail generally comes up when the soil is lacking things like nitrogen. Mare's tail is really good for your soil if you chop it off and leave it on the soil to work into it, but if it's near your plants, it's out competing it. Same with the bindweed, it literally strangles the plants. It's no fun. It's no fun at all, especially if you don't like weeding. I hate weeding. However, despite all that, we have been able to grow a lot of things. We'll show you some clips and some footage of some of the plants that we have been able to grow and that the wildlife are enjoying at the garden. Recently at the plot we have been working around the weather. We've had some not crazy high temperatures for some of you watching, but fairly high for here, like 40, 42 centigrade. Even on the days when it's 26 to 30, our plot has got no shade, so it's not workable, not for somebody who comes from Scotland, has pale skin. I don't find it enjoyable to work in the heat, so I tend to go down for an hour and a half or something in the morning. My husband was sometimes going in the evenings, and we're just trying to work around that, and rest intermittently as well, and try and get a more regular schedule. We are there more regularly now, which is really good. We've been able to harvest onions. They didn't crop as well as I'd hoped, but considering the circumstances and weed pressure, they did great. The best ones were the Tropea, the Italian variety that I mentioned in my heirloom video. They were fantastic, and actually looking at the description again, they were created to grow on clay, so it explains why they were happy there. The white ones from seed didn't grow that well. The sets did okay. The shallots didn't grow that well. The red Creole bulbing onions didn't do well. I will focus on varieties where possible that like to grow in clay. Makes sense, right? You learn. I knew that with the carrots, but I didn't know that onions would have an issue. I will probably in the future grow white onions from sets. We harvested the garlic at home earlier than I hoped to this year. It's the first year that I've ever grown it. We planted it back in October. The garlic had allium fly damage, and I knew that they go down into the roots and that they have like a maggot and it cocoons there and then it hatches out. So I harvested it and dried it off. It was pretty good considering it was organic garlic bought from the supermarket, and a few elephant garlic cloves. Elephant garlic didn't do that great. I will try it for one more year and see what happens with that. We got a tunnel at home, a relatively cheap, zippy tunnel for growing our tomatoes and our chilies in. They seem to like it in there. We also got an automatic watering system. That was my husband's gadget. He is enjoying tinkering with that. He's trying to make my life easier. We had to look at some things to knock the job list down for me to make it more manageable. Also at the plot, we started to build a birdhouse gourd arch really. We also wanted it to be big enough that we could sit underneath it to create a place of shade later on in summer. We built half of it and then the plot flooded. You cannot make this shit up. I don't mind working in mud. I used to farm in Scotland. Mud is not an issue for me. But we were sinking like calf deep in some places. The rose arch that we built sunk and twisted to the side. The birdhouse, sorry, the gourd arch started to move, so we had to put on hold for 2 weeks until it dried, and then we managed to build the second part of it. We planted bottle house gourds on there. We planted trombosino squash, which is, they can get to about 1 metre long. They're sort of courgette-y, I believe. I also planted Market More and White Wonder cucumbers on there. They've done terribly. They taste really bitter. I think it got too hot. I planted them too late. It's my fault. The birdhouse gourds are loving life there, and we have got some small plants, small fruits on there already. Our pumpkins are one of my favourite things to grow, and in the right hand part of the garden I've got corn and pumpkins. I wasn't exactly doing a Three Sisters thing, but kind of half part of the way, 2/3 of the way. Three Sisters is growing squash, corn and beans together to try and create a good growing environment for all three things. I'll go into that in another video probably. I believe that that side of the garden, in that at the front end, is unhappy. We found some canisters which are prohibited from being used on our garden. I have no proof whether they were used on the plot. I don't believe with that weed pressure that a 90-something-year-old could manage it without chemical help. And I think that that part of the garden has been affected because I have never had issues with growing pumpkins, and usually not in a rich soil. It's clay, they usually love it, but they are not happy. The corn is okay. We'll see. As I say, I don't know what really happened there, but next year I will try and improve the soil in small manageable sections there so that I can try and help nourish it, and maybe use some chicken poo and things like that, things I have to hand. I have Atlantic Giants on the right hand side. Maybe I'll get something, but currently there is no viable fruit growing on there. I have got several other varieties of pumpkin on the right hand side with no viable fruit yet, and it's not for the want of pollinators. We have at least 3 beekeepers on the plot, plus natives as well. There's bees in every single one of my squash flowers, several bees, plus butterflies as well and other pollinators. So it's yeah, I think it's a soil issue. I don't think I'll be winning the plot competition this year. On the other side of the area that is been well worked and seems quite nicely aerated, we have got some really lovely squashes growing. We've already had some courgettes growing, and I've already harvested my first pumpkin from there, which we'll show a picture of just now. Pumpkins bring me a lot of joy. I find them typically very easy to grow and very much looking after themselves, and just lifting leaves and finding that lovely shaped fruits. I think they're great. Or they're not a fruit, are they? Legume, I don't know. Pumpkin. Lifting the leaves and finding the pumpkins under there is wonderful. I love displaying them. It's a very Dutch thing here. You display at the end of summer and going into autumn. People have piles of them outside their front doors. No one can tell me why. If you know why that's done here as a tradition, please let me know. I love displaying them both in the front and the back of our home, and sometimes within the home as well, especially around about Halloween, which is one of my favourite celebrations. And I also enjoy eating them. My family does not share that, so but we have other family members that we can share them with, so that's why I enjoy growing way more pumpkins than I should. Some point amidst all that chaos, I created a small garden up near the shed for dahlias and cut flowers. I only have cosmos and dahlias in there at this point, and some zinnias. It's a bit of a tribute to my mum and my stepdad, who passed away last year. My mum loved dahlias and she was absolutely amazing at growing them. She just knocked it out of the park every time. She loved dinner plate dahlias, the bigger the better. So I have managed to grow some. We'll insert some pictures of some of the ones that have grown so far, but we are regularly taking bunches there, which I actually have some here. This is probably my favourite one. I don't think she would have loved this one. This is obsidian. It's very lovely. It's a goth dahlia. It's very cool. In our tunnel at home, we had a very special visitor one day. It is a butterfly that will make me stop doing whatever I'm doing and come to see it. And that's what we did. We had to catch it in order to get it out of the tunnel safely, and we were able to release it back outside, but we managed to get a quick picture. They're usually very fast on the move, and it's the European swallowtail. I'm not going to try and say the Dutch name, but we'll insert that. We had our first one in our garden last year, on the Buddleia. They like fennel, sorry, that's a lie. They like dill, and they like carrot, and they like wild carrot. So that's what they like to lay their eggs on, and that's the favourite of their caterpillars. So we did try and plant more of that this year to encourage them, but I think they just come here for all the nectar bank that we have with all the Buddleia and the flowers and things. It was a really nice visitor, and that's what we'll leave you with today. Along with some other wildlife footage that we've taken over the last few months, and I hope to see you back soon with a nicer video with less stuff to catch up on and no grumping about people. Just us gardening and growing food for our family. Until next time, take care, bye bye.